Cool, awesome. Assalamualaikum everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. Really appreciate your time. We're so excited to be hosting this event. I know last few weeks have been pretty heavy, and we sent out communication about kind of the recent events with just everything that's happened with COVID and Black Lives Matter. And we encourage you guys to reach out to us if there's any resources we could also help provide and support. We can reshare those resources as well to you, but really just encourage everyone to continue supporting those efforts and making sure that marginalized groups are continued to be listened and heard. This event has been kind of in the making for a while, and Sara has been so supportive in our events previously, and we're so excited to have her talk about her journey as a Scrum Master experience. Before we get into that, just wanted to give some context on who we are as an organization. So this organization was started back in October 2019 with the hope to connect Muslim women who are across different industries, really just grappling with all types of tech. And that could be software engineering, it could be marketing analytics, data professionals, consultants, and really just trying to network and expand the Muslim community. We saw a big opportunity with a lot of Muslim people who are just trying to make it out in their field or get their foot in the door. So we are really just aiming to increase the retention of Muslim women in the tech workforce. As for our vision, we want to do this by providing mentorship opportunities, educational opportunities, and also career opportunities. So we do this through our events. We've had quite a different variety of events, which I'll talk about before, but we really want to support Muslim women across Chicago and different cities as well, with the intent of just growing and scaling this organization. And hopefully, inshallah, more Muslim women in tech is the goal. As for our events, we've had quite a few in the past. Most recently, we had just a chai chat, which was just to connect with the Muslim women and kind of see how they were doing in quarantine, share some tips on how they've been combating work from home routine, as well as just kind of the battles of being remote and not feeling burnout. We've also had an event at a company I work at called Avant, and primarily just wanted to shadow Muslim women who face microaggressions and how to combat those feelings of feeling kind of isolated and alone and kind of being like the token Muslim in the workplace and how to combat that. We also had another event with Siham Hussein. She's a Google software engineer. She shared her journey of how she came to Google and really just told us, it's okay to have imposter syndrome and how to combat those feelings as well. So a lot of different events, and this is one of our third installment of this event, which is with Sara to do the Scrum Master experience. So without further, I'll let Sara out there take it away from here.
Hey guys, my name's Sara. I'm an application developer at CNA Insurance in Chicago. Before that, I just graduated about a year ago from UIC studying computer science, and I did a minor in linguistics, so just a little bit about me. So yeah, let's hear about Sara. So Sara Abu-Ghnaim is a certified Scrum Master with 4.5 years of experience across the telecom, marketing, and retail industries. She graduated from Northwestern University with a bachelor's in computer science and a minor in psychology. She then went on to work at Conversant she went to AT&T first in Chicago, and then she went on to Conversant, which is a data-driven marketing, or she worked in data-driven marketing, and currently she's at Acuity, which is a division of Home Depot for visualizing retail data. In her free time, Sara enjoys frequenting concerts, art museums, and has been to over 80 concerts, which is insane. It's really cool. And she currently lives in Toronto with her husband and cat. So take it away, Sara.
Thank you so much, Sara. And thank you to the MWT board for having me. It's truly an honor to be presenting today. So let's jump right into it.
Also, before we go into it, not to cut you off, but we're going to save the end for networking from the audience and just to get to know everyone. Usually we do this at our events, but hopefully everyone can stay till the end for that part. But thanks.
Sweet. All right, so Scrum Master experience. Oh, can you see the side panel here on my screen?
No, I don't, Sara.
Oh, just want to make sure it's not blocking the screen. Yeah. All right. So hey everyone, I'm Sara Abu-Ghnaim. These three letters after my name, I will be explaining CSM, Certified Scrum Master. I will be explaining my journey, how I got to where I am, what are Agile and Scrum if you've never heard of those, what's a Scrum Master and how does that fit into the tech industry, best practices, what to do while being a Scrum Master, the skills that were required, certification, and then also we'll jump into some questions and answers. My journey. All right, so I have had a pretty STEM heavy background. I did a lot of enrichment, STEM stuff in elementary school and high school, all AP classes, all of that good stuff. And then I went on to Northwestern University where I got a bachelor's in science in computer science with a minor in psychology. And then shortly after that, I decided not to take the software engineering route and to go more into the management side of software. And so that was software project manager at AT&T. And I was in their college new hire program. Then sorry, give me a second. Are the slides a bit zoomed in? Can you see the full slide?
They look good to me.
Oh, okay. That might just be your computer. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, my role was software project manager at AT&T, and that wasn't really a Scrum Master role. I was doing more work breakdown schedules and deciding whether a project should be waterfall or mixed or Scrum. So that had a lot of software project management methodologies. So after that, I wanted to get more of just like, pure Scrum experience, and I went on to Conversant, and that was marketing. And so my role there was technical project manager and Scrum Master, and I quickly realized that you can't do both well. So you're really either focusing on being a Scrum Master or technical project manager. But try to make it work. A lot of the companies that you'll encounter in industry won't do pure Scrum, or they'll kind of be transitioning. A lot of these companies will do Agile and some mixture of Scrum, or they'll be on their Agile journey. But yeah, and so then the company there paid me to become a certified Scrum Master. So I'm really thankful for that. That was $1,000 to do a class, which I'll be talking about in a bit. Then I moved on to Acuity, and that is in Canada. They're a division of the Home Depot, and here I am a lead Scrum Master. So I'm actually the first Scrum Master they've hired. So I got to build a lot of the Scrum culture, Agile behaviors, and just culture shift in that aspect. And they have actually just hired the second Scrum Master. So I call myself the lead Scrum Master. All right, what is Agile? What in the heck is this term? So Agile is an umbrella term, and this is taken from Wikipedia, but I will read through it. It comprises various approaches to software development under which requirements and solutions evolve through the collaborative effort of self-organizing and cross-functional teams and their customers/end users. So a few key things here. The requirements and solutions evolve through collaborative effort. So in Waterfall, previously in the 90s and previous to that in software development, it was common to just have the requirements written out in the beginning. You worked with business owners, product owners, and the whole business side to write out fully fledged out requirements. And then it was handed off from the business owners to the software developers, and they just had to work on it, develop it. Like you've got a year, you've got whatever budget, and just do it, and we'll come back to you. And so oftentimes what we found was that by the time, that year or two was up, the software developers had developed something that the business people didn't actually want anymore, or they wanted something different. And so then it required a lot more money to redo it, and then you were often over budget and over time. Like you had used the whole timeline, and so everything was late and expensive. So there needed to be a change in industry. Nobody was happy. The developers weren't happy. They were being overworked. The business owners weren't happy because they were getting the wrong product. And the owner of the company wasn't happy because they were paying way too much for this software. So here in Agile, the requirements and solutions evolve through collaborative effort. And what that means is that the product owner is a person who is acting on behalf of the business, and they know sort of which requirements are going into it and what the look and feel of the product should be. So they're usually not a technical person, but they know how to guide the Scrum team. And then they have myself, the Scrum Master, who owns the Scrum process and makes sure things happen in an orderly fashion. I wish I knew this stuff talk about. We have the developers and the testers, QA. So it's all cross-functional. So that's what this part is. And usually I have not just a set person, like a developer, backend developer. There'll be a cross-functional, like a full stack developer. It's happened a lot in industry, and it's really hard to achieve. But that's the goal. Right, and so then the solutions evolve through collaboration. So you start out with an idea of the project, but then the requirements get written as you go along. So there's no giant requirements document that the team is handed in the beginning. And that's really key. So the development team is able to discuss, ask questions, size things, really conceptualize how big a specific piece of work is, or the effort. And then, so it's a collaborative effort with the customers and end users. And this is also key because the end user will be demoed the product every sprint. So a sprint is an increment of work, usually lasting 2 or 3 weeks. And then there's always a demo at the end. So the customers and end users will be seeing exactly what they're paying for during this process. So there's no such thing as, like, developers go work on it, software engineers just let us know what happens at the end of a year or 2. That doesn't happen anymore. So they're aware, they're involved in the process, and they see what's happening. All right, and so then here, with Agile being an umbrella term, there's a lot of different flavors and methodologies that go into it, and I'll be talking about this one, Scrum. You also have Lean, Kanban, Extreme Programming. Continuous integration is one that can be inserted into a lot of these different methodologies, and that's about continually integrating with other systems, so making sure like DevOps and security teams, DBA teams are aware of everything that's going on, but also like whenever a piece of code goes into production, it's continually integrated in the test suite. So it's also being unit tested as you go along. And so there's no like overhead of doing testing at the very end of a project. In any case, I digress. So you've got these are the lightweight approaches, these are fuller approaches. If you'd like, please, do research it. There's a lot to be read about it, a lot of work that has been done, and many examples in industry. So, as I said, in 2001, 17 developers formalized this Agile manifesto. And this really encapsulates what Agile is about. So they're saying we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and these are the key tenets: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. So like I was saying, no giant documents explaining to you how exactly to use the software or what requirements were done. It's really like you interact with software developers and you know what the software does because they've just worked on it. Like you're closer to the software and who made it. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So, there's, even in consulting, software consulting, like the software developers aren't involved in negotiating contracting exactly like what happens when you click this button or which API is used when you do this. Like that's all decided as a project is ongoing, not something that's argued over before the project even starts. And that's customer collaboration, so they're involved in every phase of the project. And then responding to change over following a plan. This one is huge. So as you all know or have learned, software is ever changing. There's always bugs. There's always things that come up that you're not aware of at the onset. There's always going to be problems, unforeseen circumstances, and so rather than trying to control those aspects while you're going through the project, this is about responding to change. So, you say in the next 2 weeks, we're going to work on this API or this part of the front end, this chunk of UI UX. And, if something comes up and there's data integrity issues, you're not going to say, okay, we'll do that later. Like this wasn't part of the plan. We're just going to focus on exactly what we committed to and then figure it out later. Because data integrity issues could possibly, lose customer information. It could be leaking it out to the public. It's a huge security concern. And so it's about responding to change and responding to what is the most, critical thing to do right now. So there you have it. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So these could still be important in the context of the project that you're working on, but these matter more. And I will say Agile and Scrum aren't always the best thing to do. Like it is industry standard, but in a lot of projects, it's still useful. So like you see it being used in government projects a lot, like where it's most helpful to actually lay out everything you need in the beginning and then, you know, get back together at the end. I've heard it being used there, and then the automotive industry, so anything involving computer security, and sometimes in consulting. So it, like, while I'm saying this is, you know, the best method to do and everything, it kind of does depend on the industry that you're in and what the company is really focusing on. A lot of companies do focus on, you know, customer collaboration, working software, but some do value documentation. Like I know governments are still really focused on waterfall, and that's just the best process for them right now. All right. Oh, and then I just wanted to point out, Mike Beadle, I did take my Certified Scrum Master class with him, so I was trained under him. So it's pretty cool to be connected to, you know, the whole movement by 1 degree. All right, so here you have more of a visual layout of what waterfall is. So you've got your requirements, you go into design, then you go into implementation, then testing, then maintenance. And, you know, by the time you get here, your requirements probably have changed or someone wants something different. And so it's not really helpful in a lot of industries. Here, Agile, you start with your backlog, which is a running list of items or tasks, and then you go to analyze them, define them, design them. That could be, you know, just with API design or UI UX design, and then you go into testing, QA teams, and deploy. And this whole process happens every sprint, so every 2 weeks. This is not a month-long process. This is a, you know, 2-week process in Scrum. Yeah, so testing is usually not left until the end, because then that becomes a giant task and a lot of things have to be reworked or bugs come up, defects come up. So it's best to do it in chunks. All right, so what is Scrum? So Scrum is a flavor of Agile. Agile is still the overarching umbrella term. Scrum is one of the flavors that a lot of companies do employ, and it's in the companies that I've worked at, it's seen as best practice. But with doing Scrum, you can still incorporate a lot of those other flavors as well. Like you can pull from them, like extreme programming or Kanban. I worked at a company, so at Conversant, Kanban, I recommended it to the VP because one of my teams, the DBAs, data administrators, it made more sense for them to not work on sprints that were like time box, so 2-week sprints. It made more sense for them to do just like a running list of, you know, whatever is high priority, bring it in, complete it. So I'll just be talking about Scrum here, but there's a lot of good things to be read about, you know, pulling different methodologies into like a team that has been, so that we use a term like Agile mature, is mature in agility, or like mature with Scrum, like they've been working together for a long time, and they're knowledgeable and educated on Agile and Scrum processes and the principles, and then you can sort of pull in different things just based on what works. So along those lines, Scrum is doing the simplest thing that works. The requirements, architecture, and testing plan do evolve over time. And the formal definition of Scrum by scrum.org, and you can see the Scrum guide there as well, is that Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex, adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. So it's all about being adaptive and responding to change and delivering the product with the highest value possible. So we always say like MVP, minimum viable product that you start out with. That's the smallest increment that would be useful to the client. So that's what you start out with, and then you can add bells and whistles once that is working. There's also the concept of like KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Like just do the simplest thing that works and then see what happens. And if someone's satisfied, you can add on all the different features. There's also YAGNI, you ain't gonna need it. Sort of, I guess, engineers and, you know, us STEM-minded people love to, you know, and maybe over-engineer sometimes or fix complex problems. But that might not always be what the customer wants. So, you know, if you're working on your code and you're like, oh, I'm going to add this, I'm going to add that, I'm going to do that, you're not going to need it. Like the customer might not need it. You might not need it down the line. Like it's a bit short-sighted, I guess, in that respect. So it's all about, you know, responding to what the product owner wants or what the business side wants. And that also helps protect developer time, because if you go off and work on your own stuff and, you know, you're a developer and you're doing a bunch of things, it's going to result in burnout. because you're working on things that you might not know people want, but also you're just putting in a lot more time and effort, and that's not protecting your own time and energy. So Scrum methodology, it defines team. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. So Scrum methodology, it defines team roles. So I've mentioned product owner, there's a Scrum master, there's software developers, there's could be dev managers, and those are people who guide, I guess, the technical aspect of the project but don't code. That differs, but that's not a formal team role. Developers and QA. So that's everyone that you need in all the ceremonies. And so there are 5 ceremonies, and those are specific meetings. And we term them ceremonies, so it's not just like you sit down, here's your meeting, it's going to be boring. Like you might listen to some parts of it, but not other parts. We don't subscribe to that in Scrum and Agile. It's all about everyone being involved and everything that's said having some impact or some importance to people. Like I've been in a company where, they didn't respect developer time, and so everyone just added meetings to their calendars whenever they wanted, and sometimes they would get to their actual development work, sometimes they wouldn't, and that's really not a great process. You want to make sure that you're protecting developer time, and they're only having these 5 ceremonies on their calendar. So, and these are specific meetings that they always anticipate and always know that are coming up within the 2 weeks. And then there are artifacts that are updated and delivered in each increment of work. The increment of work is called a sprint. So that's 2 or 3 weeks. It's defined at the start. And yeah, guidelines for how to work. So, and the artifacts are usually, so the backlog, we have the work that's actually delivered and demoed at the end. And then you have the sprint backlog, which is everything that was committed to in the sprint. So things that you pull out of backlog and say, okay, we're going to do this in the 2 weeks. And we're committing to that right now. And then you also have the sprint goal, which is a sentence or 2 saying like, what are we setting out to do? Just as a summary. Yeah. And then some other minor artifacts are also like this, the burn down chart. But I'll get into that. So these are the ceremonies, what we call meetings in a 2-week sprint cadence. So every single day, every working day, we have the daily stand-up, and that's a 15-minute meeting where the developers will get together, collaborate, and see what was done yesterday, what will be done today, and any blockers that they have. So it's a good touch point in the beginning of the business day to say, all right, here's what we did yesterday, and here's what we're going to do today, and here are any blockers that we have, and someone needs to help us with the blockers. So whether it's the Scrum Master going off and talking to people, or it's the product owner who needs to clarify something in a ticket, clarify an ambiguous requirement, or if it's 2 developers that really need to get together and talk, they can decide what all is going to happen for the rest of the workday in the daily stand-up. So this is really crucial. And you want to keep it time boxed to 15 minutes. And we call it the stand-up because everyone stands up if teams are co-located, and we talk. And so usually it goes person by person, answering those 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And do you have any blockers? And you want to keep it to 15 minutes because while you're standing, you really notice how long you've been standing, and nobody wants to be standing for hours. And then you go off and everyone does their work. If you're not doing co-located teams and there are remote teams, it will have to happen over a call, but still you want to keep it time boxed, because otherwise, there will be tangential conversations or things that aren't really important to like point time. What are we doing right now? So yeah, for all my teams right now, we do have it set to 15 minutes. And then, so this, you have that every day. Sprint planning happens on the Monday. And this is where you pull in all the tickets that are going to be worked on, and then you write the sprint goal here. Backlog grooming is where we go through. So myself, the Scrum Master, goes through the backlog, and then we see it is all information in this ticket. Do we have the requirements we need? And let's size it. So you size it. We do Fibonacci sequences. So a ticket could be 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, or 13. And usually don't want to go above 13 because then that denotes like a very large piece of work that should be chunked down into smaller tickets. So yeah, backlog grooming discussion happens. Sometimes the UI UX people will attend and present new designs so that the front end team can say, okay, now we have a little information, we're going to write it in a ticket, and now we know what's up. And this can happen either twice in a sprint or just once. Some of my teams do twice, some do once. It really just depends on what the team agrees. And then, so I'll talk about sprint review and demo. This is where the stakeholders, clients, end users will gather together with the development team, Scrum Master, and the product owner, and this is where you demo the working piece of software. So hopefully over the sprint, over the 2 weeks, you should be working on something that it will be potentially demoable, and so we call it potentially shippable increment, a PSI. Like if you were to hit just deploy, release, like it would be good enough to put out into production. That doesn't always happen. Like a lot of times companies will wait for, 3-4 sprints to pass by, or until like they've reached the release, they've really reached the a release completion, like they've completed like X number of features, then they're able to give it out, release documentation and things. So yeah, there's the review, and then we will go through usually like what was complete, how many bugs came up. There's like a QA summary, where we are on the roadmap. The product owners will say, okay, here we are, and this is where we're going, and this is what we've already completed. So it's really helpful for the stakeholders. Yeah, and then we'll just take questions at the end of that. And then there's also the retrospective, and this, a lot of teams or a lot of companies will neglect this, but I think it's extremely helpful. So in the retrospective, you usually ask 3 questions. What went well during the sprint? What did not go well? And what are some actionable steps that we can take to address the things that didn't go well in this next sprint? And so it really gives the developers an opportunity to say, like, how did we work well together? How did we not? And what's not desirable? And what can we do to improve that? Whether it's like management wasn't clear about this one thing, or like I didn't enjoy how like we were working in silos. I really want more collaboration. They're able to express those grievances, and then myself as a Scrum Master, I will come up with innovative new ways, or like it'll come up in discussion about like, okay, what's a simple thing we can do to fix this? And we always try to keep it within like, what can our development team do? Like, how can we control this, or how can we alleviate it? Because you don't just want to sit there complaining saying like, oh, management really sucks, or like I hate Jira and I want to use a different ticketing system. It doesn't do well to just ruminate on the bad. It's always about coming up with solutions and how can we try to fix this in the next sprint. And then at the end of the next sprint, we'll review like which of these action items helped, which do we want to continue and make a habit in our team and like incorporate into our team culture, and which ones were just not so helpful, and like if it wasn't that helpful, we'll think of another solution. And so we're constantly improving incrementally and trying to alleviate those things. So I personally think the retrospective is something to not be dismissed or glossed over or just thrown out the window. And then in the review, we will also talk about a few things that just with keeping team confidentiality, we won't lay it all on the line, but we'll say these are some things that went well, these are some things that aren't, and we're working on a solution. Like this is something we're addressing and we're managing. So yeah, there's a look at all those 5 ceremonies. So daily stand-up being first, sprint planning, backlog grooming, retrospective, sprint review / demo. And this is sort of what I was mentioning, the burn down chart. So for increments of work, you will use story points. And they are an estimate of effort, not time, to complete a specific chunk of code or a specific feature, or just like a specification in a requirements ticket. So as I said, like it's Fibonacci sequencing. So then once you pull them in, so here we are, sprint planning, we're pulling it in, we're saying we're committing to this amount. And so here, this team, this is my mobile team, they committed to about 66, 67 points. And then after, you see the days on the x-axis, story points on the y, and this was a 3-week sprint. We usually run on 2, but this was a bit of, I think they were trying to address tech debt and a few things, and so we allowed it to be a 3-week sprint. This is in February. And here you have working days, non-working days. Any spikes up are things that were brought into the sprint after we'd already committed to it. So oftentimes that does happen, and you always try to protect the sprint commitment and developer time, but sometimes things will come in. And usually when they come in, we'll say, okay, this is a really high priority. What can we take out? What can we remove from what we've already committed to? And so you see that here. We went up to 80 points, and then we took out some things. So that might have been completion or like uncommitting to something else. And yeah, and then by the end of the 3 weeks, basically at 2 or 3 story points. So there was a lot of really great completion here. And you always want to see spikes down in a burn down chart. So that means things were, the definition of done was completed. It was either released to production or development environment, and it was fully tested. So that is what this denotes. And this is actually, so I pulled the screenshot because it's the best example of a burn down chart I've ever seen in industry. You really don't see this a lot. Sometimes it'll go about to halfway, or it'll go down but then come up as more issues and bugs are reported. Yeah, this is basically a really good example of it in industry, rather than having just a textbook. You will see the guideline right here. So the gray is guideline. This is where things should be coming down to if you're just steadily going, averaging out the time and the story points. So here, with it being above the line, that means that we're a bit behind schedule. With it being below the line, that means we're ahead of schedule. And then basically averaged out to how it should be with the guideline. All right, so I've talked a bit about us being a Scrum Master. What exactly is a Scrum Master? So a Scrum Master is defined as a servant leader that owns the Scrum process. So with myself being, it's a unique position where you're serving the whole team, but you're also a leader because you're keeping in mind all these Scrum, principles and methodologies and things that could potentially help the team, and you're pulling it out of your toolbox as the team needs. But you're not exactly a leader. So I'm nobody's manager. I don't have any direct reports, but I'm still owning this process, and there is an aspect of trust for my position. So I don't give direct orders. I'm always asking, what would help serve the team? What do we think about this? How are we going about this? What process are we going to enact? What's going to help us the most, rather than saying, you guys, you talk way too much and stand. I'm going to start asking everyone a question and that's going to be it. We're going to leave. It really can't be that sort of, disrespectful, authoritarian position. It has to be a compassionate person who is excellent in communication. So that's what servant leader that owns the Scrum process, that is what a Scrum Master is. We remove impediments. So our whole goal is to help the development team work efficiently. So they'll work as a well-oiled machine without having them to worry about, some communication that needs to happen, or crap, one of these stories doesn't have enough requirements, or the acceptance criteria isn't really clear. That should be on other people, not the developers. The developers are there to, assist in attend the Scrum ceremonies, talk about what we're going to be doing and what's happening, and then just do it. So we are there to take over the communication overhead, talk to different teams, talk to the dev manager, talk to QA. Of course, there will be natural collaboration there because developers need to talk to QA, but they shouldn't be spending time in external meetings. So anything added onto the 5 ceremonies that are already happening. That is taken on by the Scrum Master. If I need to go coordinate with a product owner of a different team, I will do that. If I need to talk to the VP of engineering, I will do that for the team, and I'll get back to them. So they shouldn't be concerned with those things because it will take time away from their tasks. Innovating new ways of changing behavior and culture shifts. Like I was saying, we have, once a Scrum Master is educated and has this toolbox and is able to pull certain concepts from, XP or Kanban or different methodologies, or just within Scrum, reading on blogs and ways that other Scrum Masters have solved certain problems, you're able to sort of think about what would help my team. Maybe this certain concept would, so I'm going to bring it up in the retrospective, or I'm going to bring it up in stand and see what everyone thinks about it. And it really helps to have a development team that is open to trying new things and then evaluating whether it works or doesn't. So it really helps when we have open-minded teams and developers who are good to go. They're a little bit educated, or if they want education, they can ask questions. I'm always open to talking to them about, things that I've seen work with other teams within my own company or teams in the past. A Scrum Master is not a project manager nor a product owner. I've seen this happen so many times in companies where they'll just say Scrum Master / tech project manager or software project manager. You can't do both well. You're either going to fail at one and do the other well, or you're just going to do each mediocrely. So I've really enjoyed my role right now, just being pure Scrum Master. I'm not looking at roadmaps. I'm not looking at budgets, projections of time on when things will be completed, when management wants this feature to be released, or collaborating with the customers or anything like that. I'm not responsible for that. There are other roles within the company that are. And so I'm able to just focus on Scrum Master and like talking with the development team, leading. So I facilitate all of those 5 ceremonies. And yeah, so I'm, just the day-to-day for a Scrum Master, I will say, is a lot of phone calls, like Zoom meetings. So it's the 5 with my teams, 5 Scrum ceremonies. Right now I'm leading 4 development teams, and it's going to turn to 6, which is why they hired another person. But yeah, doing that and then communicating with anyone else that needs, that needs to talk to me, that needs to know something about the development, about the certain sprint that we're in, reporting metrics, things like that. But in many companies, Scrum Master and Project Manager are one role, so it just depends. Like when you're looking at, if you're interviewing for Scrum Master positions, or if you're looking at job postings, be sure to sort of see that distinction. If they want you to do project management stuff, like timelines and roadmaps and things like that, Gantt charts, that's something else that you'll have to be aware of. And I have gotten a lot of training just from the previous 2 jobs before this about that. So if anyone has questions, I'm open to answering those. All right, so best practices. Scrum Masters are accountable to the process, not the completion of the project. And I can't emphasize this enough. We're not under the gun for our developers finishing something on time. Like, it's not a Scrum Master's fault if certain things don't get released into production. And it's really nobody's fault. And it's not about passing around the blame. It's just about knowing what's happening, doing like a root cause analysis and seeing, well, what happened in this sprint? How can we do better next time? It's all about iterative improvement. So like a higher velocity is great, but it shouldn't be achieved at the cost of developer burnout, overtime, workplace stress, like a bad workplace culture. Higher velocity is always achieved when a team gets better at doing something, or if they've done the task multiple times, so the next time around they can do it faster or better, or with better efficiency. So yeah, I'm stressing this because in a workplace, if that's if blame is passed along between the project owner and the developers and the Scrum Master, like, it really just doesn't create a good culture of work. And then people are just, trying not to get blamed, or covering their tracks and making sure they're always doing their stuff on time just so they're not being blamed. And that's really not a great place to work at. And then planning realistic sprint protects everyone's time and energy. So with looking at the velocity of the last sprint, you can say, okay, we finished 32 story points. We can maybe do that again. So let's just bring in that much and see how it goes. But it's not about just trying to cram as much as you can and say, here are 72 tickets, developers, go do whatever you can. It's really not about that. It's about protecting everyone's time and energy and planning it realistically over a few sprints to see when a feature can get completed. And then sizing work should be based on effort, not time. So we really stay away from saying, okay, this feature is going to take 8 hours, or it's going to take 5.5 hours, and we're going to bill that. I know some companies do that because billable hours do matter. But in a company where that doesn't matter, it's really advisable to do by effort, saying, okay, this problem is 5 story points, and then we've got some reference story points to say, all right, this other problem is 2, this other one's 1, or this one's an 8. And so it should be all relative sizing, not based on any time increments. So it really is about the size of the problem. All right. I know I'm at above time. Sada, is it okay if I keep going?
Is it cool if we pause a bit just to open up to see if anyone has any questions?
Sure.
Yeah. So there's a chat window, or if you want to unmute your mics and ask the questions, that'd be awesome. I can ask one to start off with. So something at work that I'm responsible for that I'm trying to figure out, you might be able to help me, is, so we're onboarding our interns remotely this time. So I know a big part of like Scrum and Agile is having people in like the same area and in the same physical area. So I guess like obviously we were having like more remote like meetings, and we have like our ceremonies and everything, but what's some advice you have maybe so that could flow a little bit better?
Yeah, I would say, so with co-location, you also want to have like visual boards and information radiation, so that everyone is, up to date on what all is going on, what we've committed to, the burnout chart. So I would say, if your Scrum Master would send out the link. I don't know if you're using Jira, but send out a link and make sure that everyone's aware of like the backlog and they know what's coming up in certain sprints, having people be knowledgeable about that. And then so like right now with COVID, everyone is remote. Having the meetings happen over Zoom and not Slack. There will be like the temptation to just do like stand over Slack, or if people are feeling up to it, but it's really important for verbal collaboration. So I would say when onboarding interns, do have the ceremonies be over Zoom, and then also pair coding. I think with interns it's really helpful because they're coming from all the different experiences and like levels and universities. So pairing them with like an associate developer or software engineer would be really helpful, and like having them walk through the code together. And even just like I've seen developers do it where like one person is the driver and the other is like the watcher. So they'll both be talking about like, okay, put this in, or you forgot to send my colon, or this or that. So one person is typing, the other is talking, and they're both talking over a call. So I've seen that be really helpful. Does that help?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. It looks like we have another question in the chat. Can you define PSI?
Yeah, so PSI is potentially shippable increment. That is defined as a set of work or features that is able to be shipped at the end of a sprint. So you're working towards it like through the 2 or 3 weeks, and then it needs to be like complete or like a whole feature by the end of the sprint. So that this is the definition. So like when you click release or deploy, it's able to be integrated into the rest of the project. It's been tested and everything, and it creates like more what am I trying to say here? Another like valuable increment of work that is added to what is already done. So potential shippable increment is just you can hit release, it's out there, it's tested, a customer can use it right away. And that's usually the goal of a sprint. So you're working on something, and like with it being like fully featured, it doesn't have to be like completely like look very sleek. It just has to add something to what's the functionality of the project. Does that help, Rohina?
That's good. What is the actual breakdown of the word PSI? You keep saying it very fast.
Sorry, potentially shippable increment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Something else I think that some people might not be familiar with is I think you mentioned story pointing with Fibonacci numbers. You can kind of explain what Fibonacci, like the numbers are to someone who might not be from a STEM background, or like the point of pointing stories.
Yeah. So Fibonacci numbers are sort of like a design thing taken from nature, but it's just the sequence of numbers that add the 2 previous numbers. So it goes 0, 1, 1, and then so you add 1 and 1, it's 2, and then you add 2 and 1 and you have 3, and then 2, 3 and 2 are 5, 5 and 3 are 8, and then so the next number is 13. So the reason for using Fibonacci numbers in sizing stories is that it's you want to be able to compare something. Like if we say something is 2 story points large, that means the size of the problem is 2. And so like, what does that really mean? To be able to compare it to something, you might be able to say, 2 of these problems might equal a 5, like about. And so the difference between a 13 and an 8 would be like a 5 story pointed thing. And so like it removes ambiguity from being like, oh, something is a 12 versus a 13. You don't want it to be like so close to each other that it doesn't really make sense. Like, what's the difference between the size of these problems? It needs to be spread out enough. And so with story pointing, each team will decide, like each Scrum team will decide what a 2 looks like, what a 3 looks like in terms of their own work. And so they'll have reference stories laid out. And so every developer, when we're sizing, will do story poker and say, all right, what do we think this one looks like? After saying, okay, we've clarified the requirements. And so someone, we'll just vote, and then we'll discuss and say, okay, we've all landed on a unanimous decision that this one needs to be an 8 because the problem is that big. All right, we got some other questions. So I've always been familiar with Scrum Agile from Professor explaining that briefly during the meeting. I think you did a great job. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lemma. All right, yes, hearing you talk has made it easier for me to understand. Awesome, thank you, Samina. Is the interaction of a Scrum Master involves only / mostly with developers? Yeah, so mostly, well, I'll say it differs. I usually say it's a good day if I'm mostly talking to developers, but that there's like if you're helping people, like if you're doing a lot of hand holding, that's not good because that means the process isn't working and the product owner isn't really doing their job. So while I do like interacting with developers and talking with them over calls about, the technical problems that they're trying to solve, like that's just intellectually interesting to me. We do interact with developers, product owners, so I'll collaborate with the product owner on helping to solve the problems that the developers are experiencing on, coming up with new innovative ways. And then I also, in my company, I collaborate with the VP of engineering. So he's my direct manager, and he often asks questions, for consultation he'll ask questions to me about the larger organization. So like, hey, this team has 10 developers, and like I'll come to him and say, this is a really large number of developers. It should be split into 2 teams ideally, and we'll discuss that. So yeah, I'll say it's mostly developers, and so it helps to know a bit about software development and the whole the environment of it and just the background, but you don't have to be technical to be in the field. I've seen my former coworkers have like communications degrees, marketing degrees, English degrees, so it just like it's, as an outsider, like coming into tech, like you would just have to get ramped up on some of the terms and how software developers work and things, like just the uncertainty of software development, how it is different in an industry than other industries.
Yeah, it seems like the other questions are kind of about people who might not be in technology trying to pivot into it.
Yeah, okay, so Samina, how much tech background do you need to be comfortable in this role? It really depends. So like, I will say, like with myself having a computer science degree, that helps me to understand when a team is talking about technical concepts, but it's not necessary. Like a lot of times I'm just like typing the words that developers are saying onto a screen. Like if I need to take notes during a meeting, I'll take them personally. If I want to take notes on, something that didn't go well for them in retrospective, like I can oftentimes just hear what they're saying and write it out. But having the background and knowing about like, how things affect things helps me to be a better Scrum Master. So you don't need a whole degree in it. I would say you just need to be aware and integrated like into the tech community. So going to meetup groups, and actually I'll pull this up. So here's a few meetup groups that you can get involved in. They're having a lot of their sessions over Zoom now with it being COVID. But really I find the utility there is talking to Scrum Masters and getting to know what problems they're experiencing and seeing what kind of thought process is going into solving that. There's also some courses on Lynda and Coursera that I found. I haven't taken them, so I can't personally vouch for them, but they seem to be, just based on their outline, to be really helpful. And that's background on like Scrum Masters and then Jira. Jira is the ticketing software that a lot of companies use. And there's Women in Agile. That one seems really great. I just found a website for that. And then, within a company, you'll want to also collaborate with the other Scrum Masters and seeing what they're up to. And there's product management organizations that you can join. So I will say not much tech background as a Scrum Master. It's really all about like communication and building trust, building community. And yes, knowing a few of the technical things just within the methodology, like learning the methodology for sure. But it's a lot of soft skills. So actually this might be helpful. I'll skip over this slide. We can include that. The skill sets required. Soft skills, so solid grasp of the Scrum guide, examples of execution. This is really helpful when you're interviewing, being able to say like how you solve some problems. Verbal communication, being concise and to the point, and able to lead all these ceremonies with, like oftentimes I have to cut people off and say, sorry, like this isn't relevant to our meeting right now, like can we table it, can we talk about it offline, talk about it on Slack? And I'll say, yeah, cool, because all of these ceremonies are time blocks. They can only happen like in 15 minutes, or like we only allot an hour to it. Being highly organized, having follow-up skills, being accountable. Like I have to follow up with 1 million people at once in a day, especially like having a lot of Slack messages going on, whether within channels or personal ones. Like you have to stay very organized. Being able to follow up on tasks that either you're completing or someone else is. Gaining the trusted development team by not passing on the blame. I talked about that before. Being humble, building community. You're kind of in an aspect like a cheerleader for the development team, and it's fun. Able to speak comfortably to both upper management and developers, QA, product owners, UI and UX designers. Yeah, that was pretty key. And then in terms of like hard skills, any undergraduate degree, I would say experience with Jira is encouraged, or it's preferable. It's a widely used ticketing system, so I would say gain a little knowledge on that. And then certified Scrum Master is highly encouraged. I see we have some more. Oh, sweet, Samina. Good to hear that. You have a lot of soft skills. Rohina, can you include the rest of the slides and follow-up email? Yes, I think MWT board is going to be doing that. Sweet.
Sara, I did have a question for you. So I work at a fintech startup. It's very high growth. And one of the challenges that we have in the fintech space is, I think there's this mantra where it's like, push the code out fast. If it breaks, we'll fix it. I guess, how do you find the balance between like producing quality code and then just shipping out something fast to meet like a product requirement or a customer, requirement?
Yeah, that's a difficult problem. My company's actually trying to solve it right now. The problem with pushing out code and seeing what happens is that you end up with a lot of tech debt, and just a whole backlog of bugs and defects. The way that my company solved it, I won't say this is the best way. I think the best way is like having continuous integration, continuous deployment in place, like a lot of unit testing and the whole integration testing as well, like having that really built out and having like a QA team that's dedicated to that, so that things are caught right before like deploying. The way that it was solved at my company is that we had been going, just ignoring all the tech debt. It wasn't even like written out in the backlog, but we had to stop basically our releases and do 2 full sprints of tech debt work. So that's not, and like management approved of that, and they said it was good because like there were a lot of just like bugs in production that our clients and our users were noticing, and so it was best for the performance of the app and just like stakeholder happiness to stop everything and just do tech debt sprints. I would say that in Scrum, it's always encouraged to include a certain number of tech debt tickets within a sprint. So while you're still working on feature development, be sure to include like a buffer, say like 5 or 10 points of tech debt or like bugs and defects, so that you're working on it as you're going on, and you're not left with just a whole lot of issues at the end, like after releasing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question from Wasim. He says, would you say Scrum Master is good for business people?
Business people. It depends. If you're working like, I've seen a lot of Scrum concepts being used in other industries. Like it's used in marketing and just like with teams that need to collaborate on something, and they'd like to have multiple touch points before a certain like end date, like a Q3 or something. So a lot of these concepts can be pulled in for like other industries and business people. I'd say, yeah. Like even if you're not working with developers, like some things like having a backlog and grooming the backlog every 2 weeks, or just knowing like what's the highest priority thing to work on. I've seen some people, doing like incorporating that into their own work.
And then there's another question from Lama. She says, Scrum Master role sounds like lots of busy follow-ups. Do you use certain software apps to keep yourself organized?
Yeah, I use Trello personally, and so it's kind of like a mini board, and I have urgent and important as one column, important, not urgent, and then I think just like a done column to move everything into. And so then there's also like admin, just things that I need to follow up on that are just, company-based things. So yeah, and then I color code it by team. So I have like supplier web team, mobile team, SQD for merchants team. So I color code the labels, and then I have it separated by like what's most urgent and important, and what's like important but not so urgent. So yeah, like personal organization is a big thing, and I tend to always be on the lookout for the next best organizational tool. But right now I'm using Trello, so yeah.
Hi Sarah, I have a question. This is Aneza here. So I'm just wondering, what is the a day in the life of a Scrum Master look like? I think one thing when we have companies merge both the project manager and a scrum master role is that they don't see much work going into a scrum master. So it would be nice to understand uh, what why it's needed to have like two separate roles for that. In addition to, I mean, I understand what you've been saying, but to know that okay, this does involve a lot of work and should be assigned to a separate person.
Yeah, so okay, so I'll start by talking about like Scrum Master and Project Manager, then I'll talk about like the role not always having to be a person. So the reason for like separating Scrum Master and Project Manager is that a project manager manages like the whole project over multiple sprints, and so they're responsible for looking at the scope that the whole project is dedicated to, the budget of the overall project, like any contractors that might be working on it as well, and then timeline and building Gantt charts and like visual timelines and seeing like, all right, by Q3 here we're going to be here, by Q4 we're going to be here, and like we're deploying or like migrating something to a different team. So it's a lot of like the larger chunks of work is what a project manager will be involved in, but the nitty-gritty day-to-day work is what a Scrum Master will be involved in. And so they're the ones that are running sprints and keeping track of burn down and what developers are encountering, what problems they're encountering day to day. And so they're the ones sitting in on the daily stand and facilitating that and saying, okay, how can we help alleviate these issues that developers are managing? Whereas a project manager builds and keeps track of and updates like the timelines. And so sometimes we use product roadmap or Gantt charts. And they're the ones reporting to upper management. So they're responsible for this like project scope, whereas the Scrum Master isn't directly like they're not responsible for the project getting done. They're just responsible for looking at each sprint being complete and like basically the health of the Scrum team. But then, so there's also the conversation of a Scrum Master being a role and not a person. So in teams where they're very agile, mature, and this means that they've been working together, the same people and they have the same ownership of a specific chunk of the code base. So like say a mobile team, like they've got the whole mobile code base and they've been working together, say for months or years. That means they're agile, mature. And oftentimes they won't need a Scrum Master to run and facilitate these 5 ceremonies. The one person can be dubbed the Scrum Master one sprint, and then it can change to a different person the next sprint. So in those cases, but you want to be very careful to only implement this in teams that are very agile, mature, and they know about Scrum and all the principles, and they've been working with it for a long time and working with each other for a while. You can have the Scrum Master not be a person, but be one of the team members and have it be on a rotating basis. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the question. I see there's a few more messages.
Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, definitely. Well, there's one more, I think.
Oh, do you think the Scrum Master job will stay in demand in the future? What is growth? A lot of times we joke around about like job security, as long as software engineers are like disorganized as job security for Scrum Master. But I think in my opinion, I've seen a lot of things fall through the gaps or communication just not being taken care of, and that's something that Scrum Master will always like be able to facilitate. Just like someone will say over a call like, yeah, I need to talk to DevOps about this. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, can you send them a Slack message right after this? Or do you need me to set up a meeting with them? And then following up and be like, hey, did that get resolved? Like in the next stand up, because a lot of things are said over these Zoom calls, and there's not usually a ton of follow up unless like we try to hold someone accountable and say, okay, are you going to get back to us at this time? Or make sure that when you come back to the team and explain like what happened or what's the rationale for doing the problem a certain way. So personally, I think, yeah, the Scrum Master will still be in demand in the future, but you don't know, like change is the only constant, and you don't know what methodologies are going to be popular like 5-10 years from now, because software, it changes so fast. It's one of the fastest changing industries like of today. And like Scrum, Agile was just developed in 2001. We're here in 2020. Like it's still going, but we don't know 20 years down the line. And I don't think that's a scary thing, because like everyone's always trying to just stay up to date on their skills, and training is definitely super important in tech. Always like trying to get, like my last company did 48 hours of training per person. for a year. And just, yeah, staying up to date, going to these meetup groups, seeing what's the latest and greatest technology or methodology, being able to incorporate that in your work, I think is key.
I think another thing I'd add on to that is it seems like a lot of the skills that you need as a Scrum Master are things that you can translate into other roles too. So even if it doesn't exist in the way it does currently, I'm sure like it would be easy to transfer into another similar role.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Is it cool if we transition into audience intros? Or Sara, was there anything else you wanted to add on before we do that?
No, let me see. So I've got some examples of problems I've solved for my teams as Scrum Master. We can send those out. This is just what the CSM looks like, and it's renewable every 2 years. More information on the actual course and the test, and then those resources. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sara. That was awesome. I definitely learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too.
Yeah, thanks everyone for all your questions. This was really awesome. Thanks for having me. I will stop sharing the screen now.
Safa, do you want to share